I am Captain Jenna Floyd, 34 years old. Exactly 3 days after the soil had settled on my mother's grave, the woman I personally bathed, fed by the spoonful, and held through 240 rounds of chemotherapy, my sister Vanessa stood tall in the middle of the living room. In her hand was a photocopy of the first page of the will. Vanessa coldly ordered, I had 24 hours to pack my things and get the hell out of the house I had traded my entire career to stay in and care for my mother for 3 long years. My father stood right behind her, arms crossed, nodding like a human shield. But I did not argue. I looked straight into Vanessa's eyes and asked exactly one question. Vanessa, have you read the whole will? Or just the first page? Vanessa scoffed. She really should have read until the last page. Before we continue, please take a moment to hit the like and subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow. And leave a comment below. Where are you watching this video from, and what time is it there? I really want to know. Now let me take you back 3 years to the day my mother received her diagnosis and everything in my family changed forever. The fluorescent lights in the supply office at Hartford Base hummed with a low, irritating buzz that scratched at the back of my skull. It was a Tuesday in October. Cold, gray, the kind of morning where the coffee tastes like burnt plastic and regret. I sat hunched over a spreadsheet, double-checking the inventory for 5.56mm rounds. My back was straight, habit, not pride, and my eyes moved across the data like a radar sweep. In the Army, everything has a place. Everything is accounted for. If a crate goes missing, someone pays. Then my phone buzzed on the metal desk. The screen flashed. Mom! I picked it up on the second ring. I expected to hear her asking about my weekend plans or if I'd remembered to change the oil in my car. Instead, the voice on the other end sounded like it had been dragged through a rock crusher. It was thin, brittle, and terrifyingly small. Jenna, she whispered. The static on the line felt heavy. The biopsy came back. It is breast cancer. Stage 3. They said it has already moved to the lymph nodes. The air left my lungs as if I had been kicked in the gut by a mule. My jaw locked tight. I reached for my notebook, my hand moving on autopilot. I was going to start a list. I was going to find the best oncologists in New England. I was going to build a tactical plan to beat this. That is what I do. I solve problems with logistics and silence. I'm coming home, Mom, I said, my voice steady even if my heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I will handle the insurance. I will talk to Vanessa. We are going to get through this. No. Her voice sharpened, fueled by a sudden, desperate energy. Jenna, listen to me. Do not tell Vanessa. Not yet. She's in the middle of that big PR launch for the New York firm. She's under so much stress already. I do not want her worried. Promise me. I froze. The pen hovered over the paper, the blue ink forming a dark, ugly blotch. A bomb had just gone off in the middle of my life, but I was being ordered to sweep up the shrapnel so Vanessa didn't have to trip over it. My sister, the golden child, was being shielded from the truth while I was being handed the bill. It was a familiar pattern. Vanessa was the porcelain doll. I was the floorboard meant to take the weight. I promise, Mom, I said. The lie tasted like copper. That weekend, Gerald, the man who went by the title of my father, pulled his brand-new Ford F-150 into my driveway. The truck was spotless, the chrome trim gleaming in the pale October sun. He didn't come inside. He stood by the tailgate, pulling his golf clubs out of the bed. I walked out to meet him, clutching the biopsy report in my hand, hoping for a shred of a father's comfort. He didn't even look at the papers. He didn't ask how I was holding up. You hear about Vanessa? He asked, his chest puffing out with a pride he never showed for my promotions. She just closed on that apartment in Brooklyn. 6 figures for a view of a brick wall, but she loves it. And Brett, that husband of hers, the lawyer, he's making partner soon. That girl is really going places, Jenna. She is the star of this family. I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching him wipe a smudge off his driver. I was 34. I was on the list for major. I commanded 40 soldiers and managed millions of dollars in hardware. But to him, I was just a ghost in a green uniform. I was the reliable one, the one who didn't need a pat on the back because I was tough. "Are you going to go see Mom at the hospital?" I asked. My voice was flat. He shrugged, shifting his weight. "You know me, Jenna. I ain't good with hospital stuff. The smell makes me sick. Besides, you got it under control, right? You're the military girl. You're built for the hard stuff." He climbed back into his F-150 and drove away, leaving a cloud of exhaust and the realization that I was entirely alone. Monday morning, I didn't go to the motor pool. I walked into the colonel's office. I pulled a folder from my bag and set it on his desk. It was a request for compassionate reassignment, a death sentence for my career. The colonel looked at the paperwork, then looked at me. He shook his head slowly. "Floyd, you are on the fast track. You sign this, you are effectively breaking your own career. You will be stuck in a dead-end desk job in a backwater town. You won't see another promotion for a decade, if ever. Is this really what you want?" "My mother needs me, sir," I said. No explanation, no drama. I signed my name. The blue ink bled into the grain of the paper, marking the end of 10 years of frontline service. I went back to my quarters and started packing. I unpinned my name tag. I took off the unit patches. I put my medals and my captain's bars into a small tin box. Discipline had taught me never to hesitate once a battlefield was chosen. My mother was the mission now. I drove 40 miles to my childhood home, a drafty 2-story in Connecticut that smelled like old wood and forgotten memories. I dragged my suitcases up to the attic. It was cramped, dusty, and the ceiling was so low I had to hunch over. The smell of mold hit me hard as I sat down on the narrow twin bed. My phone dinged. An Instagram notification. I swiped the screen. It was Vanessa. She had posted a photo from Le Coucou in Manhattan. She looked radiant, holding a glass of expensive red wine, the candlelight reflecting off her perfectly styled hair. The caption read, "October is so busy but always full of love. Blessed to have a life that keeps me moving." Underneath the photo, my father had left a heart emoji. I stared at the screen until the light dimmed and the room went black. I could hear the wind whistling through the attic eaves. My bank account was gonna drain. My career was gone. And my sister was toasting to her blessed life while I sat in the dust. I turned off the phone. The war had officially started. The first night on the attic floor was a cold slap in the face. The wood groaned under my weight, and the smell of mothballs and damp insulation felt like a heavy blanket over my mouth. I didn't sleep. I just lay there, staring at the rafters, listening to the rhythm of my mother's ragged breathing coming through the floorboards from the room below. In the Army, I learned to read silence. Here, silence was just a precursor to a crisis. By day 4, the ground floor of our Connecticut house didn't look like a home anymore. It was a forward operating base. I moved my life down there, setting up a folding cot in the narrow hallway, 3 steps from my mother's door. I didn't need a dresser. I just needed my boots and a sense of duty. I taped a laminated Excel spreadsheet to the refrigerator door. It was the only thing that made sense in a world that was falling apart. Column A, time. Column B, anti-nausea meds. Column C, blood pressure. Column D, pain scale. Every 6 hours, I was there with a needle or a cup of water, my movements precise and robotic. I kept my back straight, my eyes scanning the room for signs of distress, just like I used to scan the perimeter of a supply depot in a dust-choked desert. The chemo didn't just kill the cancer, it erased the woman I knew. She was shrinking, her skin turning into something that looked like wet parchment. At 3 a.m., when the house was deathly quiet, the struggle turned visceral. I'd hear that wet, hacking sound, the warning. I'd roll off my cot, my bare feet hitting the freezing hardwood, and I'd be at her side before she could even call out. I'd kneel on the floor, my knees aching, and hold the plastic basin while she retched until there was nothing left but bile and blood. Then I'd take a warm cloth and wipe the corners of her mouth, my hands steady even as my stomach churned. There ain't no medals for cleaning a PICC line or scrubbing curdled milk off a nightstand. There is just the silence and the weight of the next hour. 6 months in, the landings started. That is what I called Vanessa's visits. They were tactical strikes, designed for maximum visibility with minimum effort. She'd roll up in a black Uber, the smell of burnt Starbucks roast and expensive New York perfume trailing behind her like a toxic cloud. She'd walk into the house with her heels clicking on the floor, her eyes darting around as if she were afraid the sickness might jump on her $500 coat. She never stayed. She'd stand a good 3 feet from the bed, her hands clasped as if she were at a museum. "Oh, Mom, you look great today," Vanessa would lie. The words were hollow, a PR script for a tragedy she wasn't actually watching. My mother would just blink, her eyes clouded with morphine, too tired to point out that she hadn't brushed her teeth in 2 days because she couldn't sit up. Vanessa would check her watch every 2 minutes. 12 minutes. That was her record. Long enough to grab a photo of herself holding Mom's thin, skeletal hand, and short enough to make the 4:15 express train back to Manhattan. My father would drift in twice a week, sit in the recliner with the TV tuned to ESPN, and leave before I even had the dinner plates on the table. He said he wasn't a hospital guy. As if the rest of us were. In the 3rd week of August, the doorbell rang. It was a delivery guy holding a massive arrangement of white lilies. They were beautiful in a funeral sort of way. The card said, "Thinking of you every second. Love, Vanessa." I felt my stomach roll. My mother has been deathly allergic to lilies since before I was born. Hives, wheezing, the whole 9 yards. Vanessa grew up in this house. She knew. Or she just didn't care enough to remember the basics. To her, lilies looked good on camera. They were on brand for a grieving daughter. I didn't say a word. I picked up the vase, walked straight out the back door, and dumped the whole thing into the galvanized steel trash can. I grabbed the garden hose and sprayed down the porch, washing away every speck of pollen before it could hit the vents. Vanessa's love was a biological hazard. That night, at 3 a.m., after Mom finally fell into a drugged sleep, I sat on the hallway floor. My shirt was stained with sweat and antiseptic. My hands were shaking. I pulled out my phone, the blue light stinging my tired eyes. There it was. Instagram. Vanessa had posted a photo of the lilies before they left the shop. The lighting was soft. The filter made everything look like a dream. The caption read, "Sending flowers to my brave mama. Missing her so much tonight. Distance is the cruelest test of the heart." 211 likes. The top comment was from my father. "Good girl, your mother is so proud of you." I stared at that heart emoji until my vision blurred. The hypocrisy was thicker than the smell of bleach in the air. They were building a monument to their own grief while I was drowning in the reality of it. I know I'm not the only one who has had to do the heavy lifting while someone else took the credit. If you've ever been the invisible one in your family, the one who actually showed up while the others just posted about it, please hit that like button. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever had a Vanessa in your life? Just type yes or share a quick word. It helps me know I'm not alone in this fight. I closed the app, my thumb hovering over the screen. My chest felt tight, like a wire was being pulled around my ribs. I switched over to my banking app. I looked at the balance, my hazard pay, the money I had saved from those nights sitting in the back of a C-130 transport plane over a combat zone was nearly gone. The numbers were dropping faster than Mom's oxygen levels. I stared at the red text on the screen. I was out of time, and I was out of money. The blue light of my phone screen felt like a laser cutting into my retinas. In the Army, I knew exactly how much fuel was in every Humvee and how many crates of MREs were left in the depot. Logistics is about survival. But here, in this quiet, wood-rotted house in Connecticut, the math was simpler. And it was deadly. $1,247. That was it. The total sum of my existence after 14 months on the ground. I stared at the red text on the banking app until the numbers blurred into a single, bloody smear. Above me, the floorboards creaked as a nurse I couldn't afford to keep moved Mom into her wheelchair. Medicare is a joke they tell people to keep them from rioting. It covers the bed, sure. It covers some of the hospital stays. but it don't cover the specialized anti-nausea meds that keep Mom from choking on her own bile. It don't cover the industrial-grade shower chair or the home health aides who charge $40 an hour to do what I can't do alone anymore. I sat at the scarred oak kitchen table and opened the laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I logged into my TSP, the Thrift Savings Plan. My military nest egg. The money I'd earned sitting in the belly of a C-130, sweating through my flight suit while we hauled cargo over zones where people wanted us dead. That was hazard pay. Every cent of it was stained with the salt of my own sweat and the vibration of engines that never seemed to stop roaring. I hit the button. Withdrawal. A warning box popped up. Early withdrawal subject to 10% tax penalty. I didn't hesitate. I clicked accept. I watched 10% of my future vanish in a single click, a digital sacrifice to pay for the present. The blood money from the desert was being traded for sterile pharmacy receipts and boxes of nitrile gloves. By the time the transfer cleared, it wouldn't even cover the next 2 months. My pulse started thudding at my temple, a sharp, rhythmic ache. I reached for the phone. I didn't want to do it. My pride felt like a dry bone caught in my throat, but Mom's oxygen bill was sitting on the counter like a threat. I called Gerald. He picked up on the 4th ring. In the background, I heard the sharp, distinct thwack of a driver hitting a golf ball. Then, the whistle of the wind. "Dad, I need $400 for Mom's new meds," I said, my voice sounding thin even to my own ears. The nurse's bill for this week came in too. My account, it's bone dry. There was a long silence, just the sound of the wind over the microphone. "Jenna, honey, you gotta understand," he said, his voice dropping into that fake, soothing tone he used when he was about to screw someone over. "I am on a fixed income now, and I just had to put 4 new tires on the F-150. Things are tight for everyone. You are a captain, Jenna. You gotta learn to manage your budget better." "Tires, Dad? Mom is literally dying in the next room," I said. My hand was shaking so hard I had to grip the edge of the table. "Don't get dramatic on me," he snapped. "I ain't got it. Call your sister. She's the one with the big New York career." The line went dead. I stared at the phone. A man driving a $60,000 truck and paying club fees just told me he couldn't spare $400 for the woman who spent 40 years cooking his meals and washing his grease-stained clothes. I swallowed my disgust and typed a text to Vanessa. I kept it professional. Just the facts. Mom needs meds. I'm short $400. Can you Venmo me? 4 hours later, the reply came. It was decorated with heart emojis and praying hands. "Oh my God, Jenna, I feel terrible, but Brett and I are totally tapped out right now. We're finally doing the kitchen renovation. The marble just came in, and it was way over budget. You're so strong, I know you'll figure it out. Sending so much love to you and Mama." I didn't reply. I couldn't. I just sat there in the fading light of the kitchen. That Friday evening, I saw the notification. Vanessa's Instagram story. It was a video of a sunset over the East River. The camera panned to show a rooftop bar in Brooklyn, the kind where you have to know someone just to get a table. Vanessa appeared in the frame, laughing, holding a cocktail glass filled with something pink and topped with a sprig of rosemary. "Friday vibes," the caption read. I knew that bar. I knew that drink cost at least $24. That single glass of gin and fancy syrup was worth 2 days of Mom's pain medication. They didn't lack money. They just didn't see Mom as a priority. She was a liability to be managed, a problem to be delegated to the strong one. Monday morning, the air was heavy with the smell of rain that hadn't fallen yet. I grabbed the keys to my 2012 Honda Accord. This car had been with me through everything. It took me to the academy. It sat in base parking lots while I was overseas. It was the only thing I truly owned. I drove it to a used car lot on the edge of town. The salesman was a guy in a stained polo shirt who smelled like cheap cigars. He walked around the car once, kicked the tires, and spat on the pavement. "I'll give you $2,000, he said. "It's worth $5, and you know it," I replied, standing straight, my eyes locked on his. $3,000, cash. "Take it or leave it, sweetheart," I got 5 more of these on the lot. I held out my hand. He counted out 30 $100 bills. They felt cold and greasy. I shoved the wad of cash into my jacket pocket and handed him the keys. I walked to the bus stop at the corner. I sat on the bench, watching the gray Connecticut sky. I had no car. I had no career left. I had no family who would lift a finger to help. The bus pulled up with a hiss of air brakes. I climbed on, the only passenger in a uniform of exhaustion. I looked out the window as we passed the road leading to my house. I was officially alone on this battlefield. As the bus rumbled on, I saw a flash of silver in the rearview mirror. A silver sedan was pulling into my neighborhood, a car I didn't recognize. I sat up, my hand tightening around the cold cash in my pocket. The bus hissed as it pulled away, leaving me standing at the edge of the asphalt. I adjusted the weight of my jacket. The 30 crisp $100 bills felt like a lead weight against my ribs, a down payment on a tragedy. I walked the rest of the way home, my boots crunching on the dead leaves. The Connecticut sky was the color of a bruised lung, heavy and suffocating. No car, no career. Just a house that felt more like a tomb every single day. I stepped onto the porch, my back straight, scanning the perimeter by habit. Everything looked the same, but the air felt different, thicker. That night, the house was silent except for the rhythmic click of the space heater. I sat by my mother's bed, my head resting against the cold wooden frame. My hand was still buried in my pocket, gripping that wad of cash like a lifeline. I was waiting for the next crisis, the next bout of pain, the next bill I couldn't pay. Suddenly, her hand moved. It wasn't the frantic, clawing motion of a woman lost in a morphine haze. It was deliberate. Her fingers, dry and rough as 60 grit sandpaper, clamped around my wrist. I sat up fast. Her eyes were open. For the first time in weeks, they weren't glassy. They were clear, piercing. Like she was looking straight through me to the wall behind. "I am gonna take care of you, baby," she whispered. Her voice was a dry rasp, barely audible over the hum of the heater. "I talked to Harold. It is done." I leaned in, my heart doing a jagged rhythm in my chest. "Who is Harold, Mom? You need your water? You need the meds?" She didn't answer. Her grip tightened for a second, a flicker of the woman she used to be, the woman who could stare down a bill collector without blinking. Then she let go. Her eyes closed. Her breathing went back to that shallow, terrifying rattle. I stayed awake for hours, wondering if I had just witnessed a dying brain misfiring or a secret mission being launched. I figured it was the drugs. In this family, nobody took care of anyone unless there was a camera involved. The next morning, the missions started. "Jenna," she said as I was changing her IV line, "I need that blue-capped cream. Not the one from the CVS down the street, the one from the pharmacy in Danbury. The small one on the corner of Main Street." I looked at her. Danbury was 40 minutes away by car. By bus, it was a 2-hour ordeal. "Mom, the stuff we have here is the same. The doctor said—" "Go!" she snapped. It was a command. A commanding officer's order. I didn't argue. 10 years in the Army taught me that you don't question the chain of command when the objective is set. I put on my coat, grabbed my bag, and headed for the bus stop. I spent 4 hours traveling for a $6 jar of cream that looked exactly like the one in our bathroom. 2 days later, it was a specific type of sugar-free cookie from a bakery on the other side of the county. Then it was a brand of tea that I had to hunt for in 3 different stores. I was Kietsuk. My legs ached. My pride was a tattered flag. I was a captain who used to coordinate the movement of tons of military hardware across international borders, and now I was a glorified errand runner for a woman who was fading away. But I did it, every single time, without a word. On Thursday, the bakery closed early. I caught the express bus and made it back to the neighborhood an hour ahead of schedule. I was walking up the street, my eyes automatically checking the driveways. Habit, surveillance. I froze at the corner. A silver sedan was backing out of our driveway. It was clean, expensive. The kind of car that didn't belong in a neighborhood of peeling paint and rusted swing sets. It had out-of-state plates. A man in a sharp charcoal suit climbed out to adjust his side mirror. He was carrying a black leather briefcase. He looked toward the house, gave a short, professional nod to the upstairs window, and then slid back into the driver's seat. The engine purred as it rolled past me. He didn't look my way. I ran the rest of the way to the house, my boots hammered on the gravel. I burst through the front door, my lungs burning. "Mom!" I called out. I went straight to her room. She was lying there, her eyes shut, her hands folded neatly over the quilt. Her breathing was deep, too deep. It was the "I am pretending to be asleep" breath I used to use when I was 10 years old and trying to avoid a lecture. I stood at the foot of the bed, my jaw set. The air in the room smelled like expensive cologne and old secrets. "I know you ain't sleeping," I said quietly. She didn't move. Not a muscle. My internal radar was screaming. Something was happening. A tactical shift. But she wasn't letting me into the briefing room. Saturday brought Aunt Ruth. She was the only one who didn't come with a camera or a list of excuses. She showed up with a casserole dish wrapped in a kitchen towel and a box of Earl Grey tea. We sat in the kitchen while the steam rose from our mugs. Ruth looked at me, her eyes narrowing behind her thick glasses. "You look like hell, Jenna," she said. It wasn't an insult. It was an observation. "I am fine, Ruth. Just tired." "You are more than tired. You are empty." She took a slow sip of her tea, watching me over the rim of the cup. "Your mother, she is a sharp woman, always was. She was the one who kept the books for your father's business before he ran it into the ground. She's smarter than everyone in this family gives her credit for, especially Gerald, especially Vanessa." I looked down at my tea. She is acting strange, sending me on errands, seeing people I don't know. Ruth leaned in. Her voice dropped to a whisper that felt heavier than a lead pipe. "She sees it all, Jenna. She knows who stayed. She knows who left. And she knows who is waiting for her to die so they can cash in." Ruth set her cup down with a sharp clack on the table. "Just remember what I'm telling you. The first mine has already been buried under the dirt. Now, we just wait for the bastards to step on it." I shivered. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt like the moments before a mortar strike. Silent, heavy, electric. I looked toward the hallway. Thanksgiving dinner was only days away. Vanessa had already messaged the group chat about her arrival. I could almost hear the click of her heels. The battlefield was set. I just didn't know the rules yet. 14 months into the war, and the air in the house smelled like a collision between a greasy kitchen and a morgue. Thanksgiving. The great American tradition of pretending you don't hate your blood for the sake of a dry bird and some canned cranberry sauce. I was up at 6 a.m. My back was a sheet of fire, but I didn't stop. I stood in that cramped kitchen, rubbing butter over raw turkey skin, my hands slick and cold. I watched the clock. Time for Mom's meds. Time to check the oven. Time to play the ghost. In the army, I was the one who made sure the fuel arrived before the tanks ran dry. Here, I was just the unpaid help. Vanessa rolled in at noon. She didn't walk into the house. She landed like a conqueror. She had a bottle of expensive red wine in one hand and a cashmere throw pillow in the other. A prop. Something to make the living room look warm for the photos she'd inevitably post to her feed. She didn't step foot in the kitchen. The smell of raw poultry and hard labor wasn't part of her Manhattan brand. She went straight to the living room, her heels clicking like a countdown on the hardwood floor. Gerald showed up at 5. He didn't knock. He just walked in and took his spot at the head of the table like he'd earned it by something other than neglect. I brought the platters out. Turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes with the lumps beaten out. I moved like a shadow, placing everything just right. I stood straight, eyes scanning the table to make sure every silver fork was aligned. Military habit. Nobody looked at me. Not once. To them, I was just a logistics officer who made sure the food was on the plates and the trash was taken out. "I'm gonna go check on Mom," I said. My voice was flat, a dead phone line. Gerald didn't even look up from his scotch. Sure. Bring her some of that soup. She needs to eat something." I retreated. I took a small bowl of thin, clear broth and walked into the sick room. The contrast hit me like a physical wall. Behind me, the sound of laughter and clinking crystal. In front of me, the stale, heavy air of a room where a woman was losing her final fight. The smell of Lysol and slow decay. Mom was awake. Her eyes were sunken, dark pits in a face that had turned to gray bone and parchment. I sat on the edge of the bed and blew on a spoonful of soup. I held it to her parched lips. Outside, I heard the sharp clink of a fork hitting a glass. Gerald's voice boomed through the walls, full of that fake, patriarchal authority. "I want to make a toast," he said, "to Vanessa. In the middle of all this hardship, she has been the one keeping us together, the glue. We are lucky to have a daughter who cares this much about family values." I stopped. The spoon trembled in my hand. I stared at the closed door. 13.5 months. I'd spent 13.5 months washing vomit off the floor and counting pills while she was posting selfies at rooftop bars. Glue? She was the one who didn't even know Mom was allergic to lilies. Mom reached out. Her fingers caught my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. She didn't say a word, but she shook her head slowly. Her eyes were a silent indictment of the man in the other room. She knew. She saw every bit of it. Later, when the dinner was over and the vultures were full, I took the empty bowls back to the kitchen. The hallway was dark, the lights flickering. The air vents carried the sound of voices from the living room. I stopped. I didn't mean to listen, but the shadows were long and the words were sharp as a bayonet. Vanessa and her husband, Brett, were standing by the window. They thought I was still in the back room cleaning up. "After this is over, we list the house immediately," Vanessa whispered. Her voice had that frantic, greedy edge. "The realtor said we can get 400,000, maybe 5 if we paint the trim and fix the porch. The market is hot in this part of Connecticut right now." Brett shifted his weight, his leather shoes creaking. "Van, your mother is still breathing in the next room. Maybe we should wait until—" "Wait for what?" she snapped, cutting him off. "Someone has got to be a realist, Brett. Jenna has burned through her entire savings, and Dad is broke. This house is the only asset left. I ain't gonna let it sit here and rot while she plays the martyr." My stomach turned. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to lean my shoulder against the cold wall. They weren't mourning. They were appraising. They were already dividing the spoils while the heart was still beating. I walked back into Mom's room. I didn't say anything. I just stood there in the dark, watching the slow, rhythmic rise and fall of her chest. But the mask I'd been wearing for 3 long years finally cracked. A single tear tracked through the dust and salt on my cheek. Mom's eyes snapped open. She wasn't drugged out this time. She was sharp, lethal. She reached under her pillow and pulled out a small, crumpled envelope I hadn't seen before. "Don't let them take it," she wheezed. Each word sounded like it was being dragged through broken glass. "Promise me, Jenna. You read every word of what Harold gave you. Don't look at the first page. Look at the very end." She gasped for a breath, her hand shaking as she pressed the paper into my palm. "It is time to fight back, baby," she whispered. I gripped that envelope until my knuckles turned white. I looked at the door, where the sound of my sister's laughter still echoed, then back at the woman who had spent her last days planning a counterstrike. "I promise," I said. My voice was a block of ice. The war wasn't over. It was just moving to a new front, and this time, I had the ammunition. 8 weeks. That is how long it took for the cancer to finally finish what it started. Mom died in my arms on a Tuesday night, the house quiet except for the rattle in her chest that just stopped. I sat there for an hour, holding her hand before I called the others. Vanessa made it in from the city 6 hours later, looking like she'd stepped off a fashion shoot. Gerald? It took him 7 hours to drive 40 miles. He said the traffic on I-95 was a bear. I just looked at the clock and didn't say a word. I already knew where I stood on his priority list. Below the truck, below the golf clubs, and somewhere near the bottom of the pile. The funeral was a circus. St. Jude's was packed with people who hadn't checked on Mom in years, but they all showed up for the free show. Vanessa was the star. She wore a black designer dress that probably cost more than Mom's first car, her hair pressed into a straight, shiny sheet that didn't move in the wind. She stood at the podium for 11 minutes. I timed it. 11 minutes of I and me. She told a story about how Mom's favorite song was Unchained Melody. She even wiped away a single perfect tear for the cameras. She lied. Mom hated that song. She used to say it sounded like a dying cat. She loved Moon River. She'd hum it every night when I was rubbing the swelling out of her feet. I stood in the back corner of the church, my back straight against the stone wall, clutching a scrap of fabric from Mom's old wool coat. Nobody came over to offer me a hand. Nobody asked how I was doing. They were too busy crowding around the grieving star in the front row. I was just an anonymous guard at my own mother's service, an invisible soldier in a war that everyone else thought was already over. The mask dropped the moment we got back to the house. The air was cold, the furnace struggling to keep up with the Connecticut wind. Vanessa didn't even take off her coat. She sat at the kitchen table and pulled a folded piece of paper from her leather bag. A photocopy. The ink was cheap, smeared at the edges where her thumb had pressed down. "We need to talk about the transition, Jenna," Vanessa said. Her voice had lost that soft, funeral vibrato. It was sharp now, efficient. "This house needs to be staged and listed. The realtor is coming by on Wednesday." She slid the paper across the table. It was the first page of the 2019 will. The old one. The one that left everything to her as the executor. "You have 24 hours to pack your bags," she said. It wasn't a request. It was an eviction. Gerald and I agreed. It is better for everyone if we just move fast. Gerald stood behind her, his arms crossed over his chest, nodding like a bobblehead. "It is what your mother would have wanted, Jenna. She wanted things settled." I stared at the paper, my jaw locked so tight I thought my teeth might crack. I looked at the man who called himself my father, then back at my sister. "I got $1,200 in the bank, Vanessa," I said, my voice sounding like gravel. "I sold my car to pay for the nurse last month. I got no career left because I took a compassionate reassignment to be here. Where the hell am I supposed to go by tomorrow night?" Vanessa didn't even flinch. She leaned back, huffing a strand of hair out of her face. She looked at me with a mix of pity and pure, unadulterated scorn. "Nobody told you to play the martyr, Jenna," she spat. The word hit me like a physical blow. You chose to stay home. You chose to let your career slide. You can't expect the rest of us to pay the price for your weakness. You wanted to play the hero? Fine. But heroes don't get a free ride once the mission is over. Martyr. Weakness. 3 years of wiping away vomit. 3 years of sleepless nights. 10 years of service traded for a university degree and a promotion I never got. To her, it wasn't love. It was a lack of ambition. A failure to launch. Gerald chimed in, his voice cold and detached. "She's right, Jenna. It is time you started standing on your own 2 feet instead of leaning on a dead woman's house." The pain hit bottom and turned into something else. Something sharp. Something lethal. My internal radar reset. The grief vanished, replaced by the cold, calculated precision of an intelligence officer. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even stand up. I just looked at them, really looked at them, and saw the vultures for what they were. "I ain't gonna argue with you," I said. I stood up slowly, my movements deliberate. "But before you call that realtor, you might want to give Harold Bryce a call. I'd hate for you to make a move without all the coordinates." Vanessa let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "I don't need a lawyer to read plain English, Jenna. The will is right here, page 1, clear as day." She was so arrogant, so sure of her victory. She had no idea that I hadn't just been a nurse for the last 6 months. I had been a soldier under the command of a woman who was 10 steps ahead of her. It is a special kind of hell when your own family treats your sacrifice like a mistake. If you've ever had someone look you in the eye and tell you that your hard work was just weakness, please hit that like button right now. I need to know you're with me. And leave a comment below with the word fight. If you've ever had to stand your ground against people who tried to throw you away the moment you weren't useful anymore, your support keeps me going. I walked toward the stairs, my boots heavy on the wood. I didn't look back at the photocopy on the table. "Call him, Vanessa," I said over my shoulder. "Tell him you're ready to read the rest." I went up to the attic and closed the door. I sat on that narrow bed and waited. I knew the artillery was about to fire, and Vanessa was standing right in the kill zone. The rain in Hartford didn't feel like a cleansing shower. It felt like gray, liquid lead falling from a bruised sky, turning the city into a blur of concrete and exhaust. I stood on the sidewalk, my back straight, my chin up. I watched the windshield wipers of passing cars fight a losing battle against the downpour. My phone was a vibrating brick in my pocket. Vanessa. 32 missed calls. A string of texts that looked like a long screeching tantrum about sheriffs, locks, and my disrespectful attitude. I didn't answer. I didn't even look. I just stared at the gold lettering on the heavy glass door. Harold Bryce, attorney at law. The office inside was thin on oxygen and thick with the smell of old paper and expensive decisions. It was cold. The kind of dry, filtered cold that only exists in places where people get paid $400 an hour to deliver life-altering news. Harold Bryce sat behind an oak desk that looked like it had been carved out of a single, ancient tree. He was a man made of sharp angles and tobacco-colored skin. His eyes were small, gray, and scanned me like a thermal scope looking for a heat signature. He didn't offer a smile. In my experience, lawyers like Harold only smile when the ink is dry, and the enemy is already in the ground. "Sit down, Captain," he said. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble. It sounded like a truck idling on a gravel road. I sat. I didn't lean back. I kept my hands flat on my knees, scanning the room for exits and blind spots. Habit, tactical awareness. Harold pushed 2 manila folders across the polished wood. One was thin, dog-eared, and looked like it had been handled 1,000 times. The other was thick, bound in a professional blue cover with a silver seal. "The folder on your left is the 2019 will," Harold said, tapping a gnarled finger on the paper. "That is the document your sister has been using as a bayonet. It names her executor. It gives her the power to sell the house and split the proceeds. On its own, it's a solid piece of legal work. In a fair fight, you'd lose." "And the blue folder?" I asked. My pulse was a rhythmic thud in my ears, heavy and persistent. "That is the result of those long, miserable bus rides you took to Danbury 6 months ago," Harold said. A faint, dry smirk touched his lips. "While you thought you were on a wild goose chase for blue-capped skin cream and specific sugar-free cookies that didn't exist, your mother was sitting in that chair right where you are now. She knew you'd never agree to it if you knew the cost. She didn't want you to carry the secret while you were already carrying her. She wanted you focused on the mission of her care." I opened the blue folder. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight. The header was in bold, heavy black ink. Codicil to the last will and testament of Patricia Floyd. Dated March 14th. Harold started reading, his voice sounding like a judge delivering a final sentence. "I hereby revoke and annul the clause regarding the primary residence, and in its place, I bequeath sole 100% ownership of the property to my daughter, Jenna Floyd. This amendment is made in direct recognition of her selfless devotion, her years of unpaid labor, and the career she sacrificed to ensure my dignity in my final days." The air in my lungs felt like it turned to stone. I looked at the signature at the bottom. It was shaky. The ink skipped in places where Mom's strength had failed her. But it was there. It was a final, undeniable command from the commanding officer. "She knew Jenna," Harold whispered. "She saw the vultures circling. She saw the social media posts about her own death before it even happened. She saw how your father spent more time polishing that Ford F-150 than talking to her. She wasn't just fading away. She was preparing a defense perimeter. She was digging in." "Will it hold?" I asked. My throat was so dry it felt like I'd swallowed a handful of sand. "Vanessa is gonna say she wasn't in her right mind. She's gonna scream about the morphine and the meds." Harold pulled a third document from the stack. a psychiatric evaluation. Your mother was 10 steps ahead. She had her lead oncologist and the head nurse sign off on her mental competency the same day she signed this. We have video of the signing. We have witnesses who aren't blood relatives. It's ironclad. He flipped to the final page and pointed to a paragraph underlined in red ink. This is the tripwire, Harold said. The no contest clause. If Vanessa or Gerald attempts to challenge this in court and they lose, which they will, they are immediately and permanently stripped of every other cent. Vanessa loses her $35,000 cash payout. She loses the jewelry. She loses the remaining savings. Your mother didn't just give you a house, Jenna. She gave you a loaded weapon to hold against their greed. I closed the folder. The weight of it felt like a ballistic shield. I walked out of the office and back into the gray Hartford afternoon. I found my rental car, a beat-up Ford that smelled like stale air freshener and old cigarette smoke. I got inside, locked the doors, and sat in the absolute silence. The armor finally cracked. I didn't just cry. I broke. I sobbed until my chest felt like it was being crushed by a hydraulic press. I sat there in that cheap rental car, my head resting against the cold steering wheel, the sound of my own grief echoing off the glass. It wasn't about the property. It wasn't about the money. It was the fact that in a family of actors and liars, the one person I thought I was protecting was actually the only one truly protecting me. Mom had seen me. She had seen the sleepless nights and the vomit and the absolute exhaustion, and she had decided I was worth fighting for. She had held the line for me. I wiped my face with my jacket sleeve. I straightened my back. I checked the mirror and saw a captain ready for deployment. Not a victim. Not a martyr. A soldier with a clear objective. I turned the key. The engine growled to life. I picked up the phone and dialed Vanessa's number. My thumb hovered over the screen for a split second. Then I pressed it. It was time to pull the pin on the grenade. Vanessa, I said when she picked up, my voice like a block of ice. Don't bother calling the sheriff. Call Harold Bryce instead. He has something you need to read. I hung up without waiting for her to breathe. The counter-strike had officially begun. The deadbolt clicked home. A heavy metallic sound. Final. I leaned my forehead against the cold wood of the door for a second, letting the chill seep into my skin. The house felt different now. No more oxygen machines humming a mechanical dirge. No more sterile smell of rubbing alcohol and slow death. Just the scent of old dust and the lingering ghost of Earl Grey tea. I walked into the kitchen. My boots sounded like gunshots on the hardwood. I didn't turn on the lights. The gray Connecticut dusk was enough to see by. I reached for the coffee tin, empty. I had to shake the last few oily grounds out of the bottom like I was scavenging for ammunition in a spent crate. I filled the pot. The water ran cold and clear from the tap. While it brewed, I sat at the scarred oak table. I didn't look at my phone. It was face down on the wood. It had been vibrating for 20 minutes straight. Vanessa. Always Vanessa. I was in radio silence. A tactical blackout, no comms, no explanations. In the field, if you talk too much, you give away your position. I wasn't giving her a damn thing. I just watched the steam rise from the pot. The coffee was black, bitter, just the way I liked it. No sugar to hide the reality of a Tuesday afternoon. I hosed down the first mug and felt the caffeine hit my bloodstream like a jagged spike. The phone stopped, then it started again. I let it scream into the empty kitchen. Finally, at 5 p.m., I picked it up. I didn't say hello, I just waited, my breathing steady and shallow. Jenna. Vanessa's voice was sharp, high-pitched, that Manhattan executive tone that always made my skin crawl like a swarm of fire ants. I've been trying to reach you for hours. I've already spoken to the realtor. He wants to bring a photographer by tomorrow morning to stage the place. Are you packed? Because the sheriff is my next call if you ain't out of that house by noon tomorrow. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the coffee. It burned my throat. Good. Don't bother with the sheriff, Vanessa. You're wasting your data plan. Oh, so you're being reasonable now? Good. It is about time you realized you don't have a leg to stand on in this town. Call Harold Bryce, I said. My voice was a flat line, cold and level. He has the paperwork. You only have the first page of an old story. He has the ending. Read the whole thing before you open your mouth again. Who the hell is Harold Bryce? I don't care about your little lawyer friends. I hung up. I put the phone back on the table, face down. I went back to my coffee. The next 4 hours were the quietest I'd had in years. I spent them cleaning. I folded Mom's blankets. I stacked them square. Sharp edges. Perfectly aligned. I wiped down the counters until they shone in the dim light. I didn't feel happy. I felt like I was clearing a bunker after the smoke had cleared. Preparing for the next wave of the assault. At 9 p.m., the phone didn't just vibrate. It screamed. It was a frantic, jagged rhythm that echoed off the kitchen tiles. Vanessa again. I answered. I didn't have to say a word. The explosion came through the speaker before I could even get the phone to my ear. "You bitch!" Vanessa was screaming. Her voice was cracked, raw. The Manhattan polish was gone, replaced by a desperate, ugly screech that sounded like metal grinding on metal. "What the hell did you do? What did you do to Mom? You manipulated her. You sat there and whispered in her ear while she was drugged up on morphine, didn't you?" I held the phone a few inches away. I didn't flinch. I'd heard worse from drill sergeants and enemy combatants. "I didn't do anything, Vanessa. Mom did. She saw you. She saw the Unchained Melody act at the funeral. She saw everything you did and everything you didn't do. I'm suing. I'm taking this to court tomorrow. You think you can just steal a $500,000 house from under me? That's my inheritance. That house belongs to me." "Did Harold tell you about the no contest clause?" I asked. I leaned back in the chair, my eyes fixed on the dark window. "Because if you file that suit and you lose, and you will lose, you lose the $35,000 cash. You lose the diamonds. You lose every single cent." "Are you feeling lucky, Vanessa? You want to bet 35 grand against a high-definition video of Mom signing that paper while she was 100% sober?" There was a silence on the other end. A long, hollow silence. Only the sound of Vanessa's ragged, shaky breathing filled the line. Then, she broke. It wasn't a cry of grief. It was the sound of a house of cards finally falling down. A pathetic, whimpering sob. "Jenna. Please," she whispered. The arrogance was gone. She sounded small, drowning. "You don't understand. Brett's firm is in trouble. We're maxed out. Every single credit card. The New York house. We're 3 months behind on the mortgage. They're gonna foreclose. I needed this. I needed the sale money. I'm gonna lose everything if I don't get that cash." A wave of disgust washed over me. It was so thick I could taste it. 3 years of my life. My career. My savings. All of it had been traded for Mom's dignity. And here was my sister, crying because she couldn't pay for her marble countertops and her fake lifestyle. She'd been ready to throw me into the street to pay off her bad debt. "You should have thought about that before you gave me 24 hours to be homeless," I said. "We're sisters, Jenna. Blood. You can't do this to me. Think about what Mom would want." "Mom wanted justice," I said. "She gave you a choice, Vanessa. You chose the rooftop bars and the Instagram feed. I chose her. You didn't lose everything today. You just already spent your share." I didn't wait for her to beg again. I didn't want to hear the sound of her failure. I hung up. The house was silent again. I stood up and walked to the window. The rain had stopped. The moon was trying to break through the clouds. I felt lighter, like a 60-pound pack had been taken off my shoulders. But the silence didn't last. A minute later, the phone buzzed again. A different name this time, Gerald. The man who had stood behind Vanessa while she tried to evict me. I stared at the name. The second front was opening. I picked up the phone. I didn't say a word. I just waited for the first shot. 15 minutes. That was how long the quiet lasted. I stood in the kitchen, the dead phone still hot in my palm. The house was cold, the old furnace groaning in the basement like it was giving up the ghost. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't want to see the empty spaces where Mom's medical equipment used to be. I just wanted the silence to stay. But in this family, silence is just the gap between two explosions. The phone lit up again. Gerald. The man who had stood behind Vanessa while she tried to throw me out. The man who had stayed in Connecticut but lived a million miles away from the sick room. I didn't want to answer. I wanted to throw the phone into the sink and watch it drown. But you don't ignore an incoming call when the enemy is regrouping. I swiped the screen. Jenna, you there? His voice was a gravelly mess. He was trying to sound like the patriarch, the man in charge. But I heard the tremor. I heard the fear. I'm here, Gerald. Don't you... Gerald, me. I am your father. What the hell are you doing? Vanessa just called me, hysterical. She says you've gone rogue. She says you're trying to steal her inheritance. How could you do this to your own sister? To your own blood? I leaned my hip against the counter, my eyes fixed on the dark window. I didn't do anything to her. Mom did. She left the house to the person who actually lived in it. The person who didn't look at her like a bank account with a terminal illness. Now you listen here, Gerald snapped, his voice rising. I am on a fixed income. I worked 40 years for this family. I was counting on that equity. We all were. That house was supposed to be my cushion. You can't just let some lawyer rewrite the rules because you spent a little time playing nurse. A little time. The words felt like a serrated knife across my ribs. 3 years, 1,000 days of changing diapers and cleaning up bile. It wasn't a game, Dad, and it wasn't a choice for me. It was for her. And she knew. She saw you both waiting for her to stop breathing so you could trade her roof for a retirement fund. Mom beat you. She was sharper than both of you combined, and she dug in. She beat you at your own game. He started to sputter, a weak, wet sound. I have rights. I'm the husband. I'm the one who paid the property taxes. You paid the taxes because Mom forced you to. And you spent 34 years choosing Vanessa. Every holiday, every graduation, every time I was in a hole, you looked the other way. Well, Mom finally looked back, and she chose me. Jenna, you're being cruel. You're acting like a stranger. No, I said, my voice like a block of ice. I'm finally acting like a Floyd. I learned from the best. Goodbye, Dad. I hung up. The sting in my chest was there, but it was dull. The hope for a father had died a long time ago. I was just finally burying the body. But Vanessa wasn't done. She didn't have the guts to call me back, so she went for the digital juggernaut. Ting, 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 ting. The family group chat erupted. It was a massive network of cousins, aunts, and uncles, most of whom hadn't seen Mom since the Nixon administration. Vanessa had dropped a nuclear bomb of a message. I'm heartbroken, she wrote. Jenna has been isolating Mom for months. She coerced her into changing the will while Mom was heavily medicated. She's been abusing her position as caregiver to steal everything from the rest of us. We are looking into elder abuse charges. Please pray for our family during this nightmare. My blood turned to liquid fire. I saw the replies starting to crawl up the screen. Is this true? Oh my God, Jenna, how could you? I always thought something was off. I gripped the phone so hard the plastic groaned. I was a captain in the United States Army. I had led men through hell. And here I was, being branded a criminal on a smartphone by a woman who spent more on her hair than Mom spent on groceries. I started to type. I wanted to rip her apart. I wanted to post the medical certs and the video. Then Aunt Ruth stepped into the fray. The group chat went silent as her name appeared. Ruth was the oldest, the one who held the family's moral compass. She didn't post selfies. She didn't care about vibes. Enough, Vanessa, Ruth wrote. The chat stayed still. I knew about the codicil 6 months ago, the next message read. Patricia told me everything. She called me from the law office. She was as clear-headed as the day she married that man. A second later, another message hit. There are medical certifications signed by the head of oncology. I've seen them. There was no coercion. There was only a mother trying to protect the daughter who didn't abandon her. Vanessa tried to type back, Ruth, you don't know the whole story. You weren't there. Ruth's final message was a hammer blow. I was there more than you were, Vanessa. I saw Jenna changing bed sheets covered in vomit while you and Gerald were in the hallway discussing the market value of the house. I heard you. and so did Patricia. The truth is out now. Live with it. The silence on the chat was absolute. It was the sound of a total tactical defeat. 2 minutes later, a small notification appeared at the bottom of the screen. Vanessa has left the group. I sat down on the kitchen floor, my back against the refrigerator. The phone went dark. The media war was over. The smear campaign had folded under the weight of a single, honest woman's words. I looked up at the ceiling. The house was quiet again. Really quiet this time. No more battles to fight. No more grenades to dodge. I closed my eyes and took a breath. It was the first one that didn't hurt in a decade. But then, I heard it. A heavy knock on the front door. Not Vanessa's frantic tapping. Not Gerald's weak knuckle rap. A slow, rhythmic pounding. I stood up, my hand reaching for the heavy flashlight on the counter. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. My heart stopped. "Jenna? Open up. We need to talk." It was a voice I hadn't heard in years, a voice that didn't belong in this town. I reached for the lock, my fingers trembling. The war was over, but the ghosts were just arriving. The probate process was a meat grinder. It chewed through 3 months of winter, leaving nothing but gray slush and legal bills in its wake. Vanessa's husband, Brett, was the one who finally broke. Turns out, when you're 3 months behind on a New York mortgage and the bank is breathing down your neck, you don't have the stomach for a long-shot lawsuit. He dragged Vanessa to Harold Bryce's office and made her sign the papers. She took her $35,000 and the jewelry. Then she vanished back to the city. No more threats. No more calls to the sheriff. Just a cold, bitter silence that suited the January air perfectly. Gerald didn't fare much better. He got his small payout, the pittance, as he called it over a jagged phone call, and realized his dreams of a gold-plated retirement in Florida were dead. He moved into a 2-bedroom rental on the edge of town. I heard he still spends his Saturdays polishing that F-150 in the parking lot, trying to look like a man who hasn't lost his anchor. I don't check in on him. I don't look for his truck when I drive through town. The chain of command was broken, and I was the one who finally walked off the post. By February, I officially held the deed. 100% ownership. I didn't celebrate with a drink or a party. I went to the hardware store and bought a 5-gallon bucket of eggshell white paint and a heavy-duty scraper. I spent 2 weeks ripping the floral wallpaper off the living room walls. It came off in long, dry strips that looked like dead skin. I scraped until my shoulders burned and my palms were raw, but I didn't stop. I needed the ghosts out. I needed the smell of Mom's sickness and Vanessa's expensive perfume scrubbed from the floorboards. I painted every inch of that house until it looked like a fresh sheet of paper. I got a job at a local shipping firm, logistics. They needed someone who could manage 40 drivers and a warehouse full of high-value freight without losing their head. The manager, a guy named Miller who wore flannel shirts and smelled like diesel, looked at my military record for exactly 5 seconds. "You're a captain?" he asked, squinting at my resume. "I was," I said. I stood straight, feet shoulder-width apart, eyes level. I didn't fidget. "Think you can handle a bunch of guys who think rules are just suggestions?" "I've handled worse than truck drivers, Miller." He nodded, handed me a radio, and told me to start Monday. "The pay ain't what a major makes, but it's enough. It's honest. It's a mission I can complete every day before I head home to my own roof." One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I was clearing out Mom's old oak file cabinet in the attic. I was looking for tax receipts when a small, unsealed envelope slipped from behind the drawer. It was tucked away in a spot where the vultures, Vanessa and Gerald, would never have looked. I sat on the dusty floor and opened it. My heart did a slow, heavy roll in my chest. It was Mom's handwriting, shaky. The letters were thin and jagged, like a bird's footprint in the snow. "Jenna," the letter began. "If you are reading this, the noise has probably stopped. I want you to know that this house was never about the real estate. I love Vanessa, but love and trust ain't the same thing. I trust you. I've watched you for 34 years, baby. I saw you carry the weight while the others just looked for the exit. I gave you this house so you'd have a fortress. A place where nobody can ever tell you that you aren't enough. Don't waste your life waiting for your father to see the truth. That's his loss, Jenna, not your fault. You are a soldier. Now, be a woman who is finally free. I read it twice. Then I read it again. The dead weight, that massive boulder that had been sitting on my chest since I was a little girl, finally crumbled. I didn't cry for Mom's death this time. I cried because for the first time in my life, the person who mattered most had looked at my sacrifice and called it what it was: strength. She hadn't seen a martyr. She'd seen a warrior. On Christmas morning, the phone buzzed on my nightstand. A single text from Vanessa. Merry Christmas. No heart emojis, no fake prayers, just a probe. A test of the perimeter to see if the gate was still locked. I picked up the phone. My fingers didn't tremble. I typed back exactly 2 words. Merry Christmas. I didn't ask about Brett. I didn't ask about the New York house or the debt. I didn't offer an olive branch. I established a steel boundary. The war was over, but that didn't mean the borders were open. I put the phone back down and went to make coffee. I took my mug and walked out to the front porch. The Connecticut winter was sharp, the air tasting like iron and pine. I sat in the old wooden chair under the massive oak tree that guarded the driveway. Its branches were bare, but its roots were deep in the frozen ground. I felt a strange, quiet hum in my blood. It was the feeling of a mission accomplished. I hadn't won because I was meaner or greedier. I won because I stayed. I stayed in the trenches when it was ugly. I stayed when it was lonely. And I stayed when the people who were supposed to love me tried to burn the ground beneath my feet. I am a soldier. And today the sun is finally coming up on my own terms. You've just heard the end of my story. It's a hard truth to swallow, but sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones most willing to spill it. What would you have done in my boots? Would you have held the line, or would you have walked away? If this story gave you the strength to stand up for yourself, please hit that like button and share this with someone who is fighting their own silent war at home. And leave a comment below with the word "free" if you're ready to set your own boundaries. Thank you for standing with me until the very end.